books. Oh, wait, now it says preparing. Okay, so now it's probably going to get me doing this. So if you're watching this weirdness, it's because we haven't quite figured out when the actual live fits kicks in. There we go. Welcome to Vintage Books Live. This is Christy Peterson. And tonight we have our guest is Emmeline Duncan, aka Kelly Garrett. And we'll ask her about that later. She can explain that. But we're just really excited that she's here. She's got a new book coming out next week, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it comes out next Tuesday, May 23rd.
Yay. So we're just going to kind of shoot the breeze. Kelly's been on before. Yay, there it is. I love those covers. That artist does such a good job.
Yeah, her rep actually tagged me in a video of her drawing this cover a few weeks ago, and it was really cool. She turns out she's an artist who lives and works in Japan. And she's done all of the Ground Rules covers, and they're all, custom illustrations that she does.
Yeah, I love the it's like kind of whimsical but cozy mystery vibes, and I love the font that they use for the title. And
well, a fun thing with that is when I got the very first version of the cover, and it actually had a different font, and that was one thing my agent and I suggested was like, what about a chalkboard font to represent kind of like their board, like the order board at the coffee shop. And they're like, great idea. And now they use a chalkboard font for all the books.
Oh, yay, that's so awesome. And it's awesome when you get to have a little bit of input and then you see the end result. That's really neat. So let's start out for somebody who hasn't read these books at all. And can you just kind of give us a brief overview of just the whole series, the concept, the basic setup? And
sure. Well, the series starts with Fresh Food Murder. And in the first book, my main character, Sage, and her business partner, Harley, have decided to open their first coffee cart and a roastery in a food cart pod in Portland. They've only been open a couple days when Sage comes into work and finds the dead body of a real estate developer dead next to her cart. And Sage's mom, I like to, if you ever watch TV show Leverage, I like to compare Sage's mom to like an evil Sophie Devereaux. Well, her mother had scammed this developer out of a lot of money like a decade before. So the police have multiple reasons to look at Sage. She has the connection, the scam connection in her background, even if, she wasn't the villain in that story, and he was killed with her box cutter and her cart had been broken into. And then the second book is Double Shot Death. The really fun part about having a coffee cart is that you can go on the road. And so in Double Shot Death, they've gone to a music festival, and you meet a cast of characters, and then the first morning of the festival stage, when she's setting up the coffee cart, she finds the dead body of a local music manager, dead in the woods, holding one of her coffee cups. And then the third book, White Fatality, which comes out next week, is set around the roastery. So Sage's roastery is in a building with a video game development company and like a gym and a few other things. And the action all takes place mostly around her roastery and the video game development company next door.
Very cool. So I've always wondered, when you do a series like this, particularly like a mystery series, do you think ahead? Because I know you're doing, multiple books. Do you think ahead about, like, even if it's just like a nugget of an idea for each one, like as you're thinking of the whole series, instead of waiting until you're writing the next book to figure out, kind of overall what it might be about?
Well, one thing was fun when we sent when Fresh Food Murder, when he sent my agent, when he sent it out on submission, we had the full manuscript, and then we had some ideas for like future books. And I think I had like 3 or 4 like 1 paragraph ideas, and then I've yet to use any of those.
That's awesome.
And right. And part of my contract is that there's a due date for a synopsis for the next book. And so it's like my books have been due, let's say April 1st. The synopsis is due like June. So June 1st. So I have, like 9-10 months to write the book. And, and for that, it's a synopsis. Like mine are about 4 pages that kind of talk about what the mystery will be. Obviously, Sage is a given, and some of her regulars in the book will be a given, but like what's the situation they're in, like who dies, and I usually do like the logic behind it and some major subplots. So I do know what the next book will be, almost a year in advance, and I usually have ideas, and I had thought about doing something that was more dramatic, like a more dramatic arc with her mom versus because Sage having like a mom that's a grifter is a huge part of her backstory and a big reason why she keeps getting involved in these cases and why she's actually good at solving murders. And so like I thought of having like a big showdown, but I'm like, that's not really the direction I want to go, right? I've used her mom in a different way, a little bit less high drama than I could have done.
Yeah. So when you sit down to write a cozy mystery versus a mystery or a thriller, I mean, the difference between a cozy and a thriller, I suppose, is a little bit more obvious, but are there some hallmarks of a cozy mystery that just kind of make it that genre that readers would expect when they say, oh, I'm going to read a cozy mystery? Like I would think, like if it's a rom-com, there's a certain amount of expectations we have of how it's going to go down. Is the same true for a cozy mystery?
Oh, very much. It's funny that you, in your first part of your question, you said Hallmark, because that's where a lot of people know cozies is like, the Hallmark mysteries and movies, which I would say are very much like a cozy mystery in a book form. No, so cozies as books tend to have cozy mysteries. They do have some very specific kind of criteria they follow, which is minimal to no language, minimal to no violence on the page. And usually there's not like graphic sexual content. And it's funny because you're like, oh, it's a murder mystery, but it's not, it's not gory. The person could have been killed in all kinds of creative ways, but the writers doesn't like, as a writer, they don't do like a camera lens angle of like all of like the blood and the gore about it. And then also it's not exclusively anymore. Cozy mysteries tend to have female protagonists. There are a few like rehearsed to death by and renovated to death by Frank Anthony, and I just got his last name. And those, have like a male protagonist, and there's I've heard about a couple more coming out, but traditionally they've mostly been like a lot of female led, and it tends to be a woman. There's kind of this almost like the cliche is the great aunt that she didn't know passed away and gave her this like yarn shop or this beautiful house or some sort of like business. And it was really timely because she just, was just cheated on by her fiance. And so she wanted to leave town. And so she has a reason to move to a small town, be the stranger, that and there'll be some reason when she's immediately in strife with someone who dies. And then she's the stranger that people would love to think did it, but she's innocent. So has to,
Yeah.
But it's also fun because, so many cozies do represent women's like the hobbies they turn into businesses and women following their passions. And I would say the other key thing, because like CSI elements don't tend to be a huge part of the mysteries, is that the cozy kind of sleuth, like something happens, the murder happens, and their community kind of goes out of bounds and things aren't right anymore. And by solving the mystery, it sort of brings like the community back into alignment.
Yeah. Would you when you're looking at a cozy, because I love that when you describe them, because all those reasons are precisely, I think, for me, why I love the British mystery, a lot of British mysteries so much, and not the like really, because there are some ones that are really intense and dark, but like the Miss Marples and the Poirots and some of the newer ones that are just a lot lighter. But there have been stereotypes to them. I think of like Miss Marple as the almost like the unexpectedly gifted woman, right? She's the unassuming little old lady who nobody, suspects could actually solve a mystery. Is there anything in the cozy mystery genre that like you as a writer in 2023 are subverting a little bit because you want it to not be the stereotypical, you want to pull the good things out of that, but maybe there's some things that you want to do a little bit differently?
Oh, for sure. I keep seeing like my book frequently on like millennial cozy lists. And when I see that, what they're really saying is well, I do have a lot of the things that make the book a cozy with a small community. Even though it's in Portland, it's like a small community around the coffee cart, like in a food cart pod.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it has like, the female led. It's also, I actually deal with real life kind of like urban issues. In the first book, one of the characters is a homeless teen that, is showing up, and she's, well, when you read it, she'll be a suspect, but Sage gets into that girl's life as well. And just things like homelessness and gentrification and affordability are all elements that come into the book. And I don't spend the whole time looking in those in like a depressing way, but they're part of what makes the book
Yeah, yeah,
kind of vibrant, is that it's I deal with actual real world stuff versus just being in a magical small town where somehow
yeah,
someone's improbable business is like widely successful. And those are fun. Don't get me wrong. I love
yeah,
reading
yeah.
those, but it's, yeah, like a very, more of an urban sort of sensibility, a younger sensibility. And I'm very aware of the cozy tropes and try to play with them in fun ways.
That's very cool. So how do you, I'm always, and I'm sitting here thinking, I probably asked you a bunch of these questions last time, but since I don't remember the answers, we can just ask again. It's a nice thing. See, this is also the reason I can like rewatch show mysteries and reread mysteries, because I forget what happens. And then it's like, oh, I don't remember, so I can watch this again. So I'm always interested because it doesn't take a lot to like pull one over on me. Like I can watch pretty much any mystery. If it's got enough holes for me to figure out, I know that it probably wasn't really very well written, because I'm like, oh, I can figure it out, then this must not be good. But that has always seemed hard to me, to put together a satisfying mystery that gets solved in the usual ways and makes us feel good because the bad guys always lose and they get carted off to jail and everything, but that has enough logical like progression that the reader doesn't go, oh, that was cheap, or that feels too easy, or that got tied up too neatly. So like how do you set about like constructing something that will ring true to people when they're reading it?
It's funny you ask, because I'm co-teaching a class at Willamette Writers this summer that's a master class on writing mysteries. And my co-teacher and I, that's something that we've been working on, over the past couple weeks.
Yeah.
And so I actually have, like, I could give you a very, very long lecture of the like kind of 4 fundamentals that I think are part of mysteries.
Well, we got time, so you can give us a little lecture. You can get us a preview of the lecture, and anybody who's watching who wants to get the whole thing can go to the Willamette Writers Conference and get the whole deal.
Like obviously a good central puzzle is a key part of a mystery, but without a good, but to have a good central puzzle, you have to have a protagonist that's like a good, strong character, like not like Superman strong, just like realistic, right? And a very active person that's, for whatever, that has some reason why they'd be good at investigating. And you have to have a villain that makes sense, and sometimes in cozy mysteries, like usually almost all mysteries, the answer is always simple, right? There was like a very specific interpersonal reason that like caused like the murder to happen. And so a villain that has like a very logical reason, and if you rewrote the story, they could be like an anti-hero, I think is a key thing to keep in mind. And and strong antagonists in general, like you can have a murder, but just having, if multiple people want the same thing, that creates natural strife in any book between all characters. But then that's also fun in a mystery, because if there is some person that's having a lot of strife with a lot of people, there are multiple reasons that someone would want to kill them.
Yeah.
And so that's, a big part. And then the fourth, I'd say, important things, that's like clues and red herrings. And like I said, if there's a character that has like a lot of, that has been in a lot of arguments, or just has a lot of reasons that they've been going head to head with multiple people, those are like your red herrings, because you look and you're like, oh, this person doesn't have an alibi, or they lied about their alibi and they have this reason. And those are really organic. They're red herrings that feel earned, because it's not like you're just completely throwing up something random. It's like, oh, this is legitimate conflict. It just wasn't murderous conflict.
Yeah. Well, and I think of, all the things that you do in your day that might seem odd if you were suddenly under investigation for something that have a perfectly innocent explanation, but the instant you're part of some kind of investigation, then suddenly that thing maybe looks a different way, and playing with that. But yeah, it honestly just blows my mind though, the organization that has to happen, because you as the writer have to know, okay, here's all the people that are going to be suspects, and here's all, here's the progression of how I'm gonna unfold it. Well, here's this clue, but oh, it can't be that because of this, and here's this clue, and it can't be that because of this. And then to be able to tie it up at the end in a way that feels satisfying is, to me, that feels very daunting. And so I'm always really I'm always impressed with the craft of, whether you're writing television or whether you're writing a book, of being able to put that together in a way that feels like, oh, this was a fun story and it made sense. Why all the people did what they did,
Right.
that they weren't just lying because they were trying to be evasive. There was a specific reason why they were lying, or why they were in this place, or whatever. And it sort of all ties up in the end. And
Yeah, like one of my favorite tropes is when someone lies about their alibi, but it's not to protect themselves, but protect someone else.
yeah,
Like, oh, I'm having this relationship that I don't want anyone to know about, so I'm letting myself be your murder suspect to protect, someone else. Like that's like, I love those sorts of fun tropes where like it makes sense logically, and you're like, why didn't you just tell the truth?
Yeah, I know. But I suppose that's true. There's sometimes where it feels, that particular trope like feels a little bit easy, but then I think about it, human nature, like if you're actually doing that, like you don't want anybody to know about it. And so
I think it works if it feels earned. Like I'm thinking specifically of the TV show Harry Wild, where it stars Jane Seymour as Harry, and she's a recently retired professor in Dublin who keeps getting involved in her son's a police officer and keeps getting involved in his cases. But early on in the series, she starts dating her son's boss, who's married to someone else, and who's actually married to someone above him in the chain of command in the police department. And so they're having this like, illicit relationship on the side. And when Harry is suddenly the suspect, and that's why she doesn't want to give, she lies and says she was at home instead of giving her true alibi, because she's protecting him. And that it feels earned because we've known him over multiple episodes, and we understand her relationship with their son, and we understand why it would be a bad idea to blurt it out. And so it works because it's earned. I agree with you. It's not a fun trope if it feels like tacked on, or just like they're doing it for plot purposes versus actually feeling like it's grounded in the characters.
Well, and I think that concept of earned is really interesting, because like I keep going back to TV just because I consume so many of these types, same cozy level, but different medium. But I think that speaks to why sometimes something falls flat, is that it, and there's a lot of subtlety, especially if you're in a 1 hour TV show, as opposed to a book that's going to unfold over a few chapters, is that it's an art to make it feel earned. Because sometimes you'll be like, well, why did this one just feel flat and this one didn't? And like I'm sure a writer could look at that and say, oh, well, it's because of this or that. But as an audience, you're going, well, that didn't work at all.
You're just like, and you move on. And I think it's fun, like the concept of earn, like it's not just mysteries, right? Like it's so important in romance. You need the characters to feel like they've earned, and they've like proved themselves to be like ready, like for their happy ever after. And
what's the hardest? I'm trying to decide. Well, I'll let you like choose what comes to mind, so I'll leave it a little bit open-ended. But if there's a scene, or just like a type of situation that you end up writing in cozies, for you personally, that's just for whatever reason challenging, that every time you come to it, you're just like,
starting, I think this is a pretty common answer, but like starting a book is always like one of the hardest parts. Like usually, like if I kind of jump in a little bit, like I have a much better flow. But there's that decision of like, how to introduce everyone, what's like too early, what would be too late, right? Where what would be like you're kind of jump too much into the action. And then writing a series is interesting because it's like, how much should you summarize of like backstory? So it grounds new readers or people that haven't read the book for a while, read the series for a while, but is also still interesting, right? I can think of one series I loved, but she introduced the characters like with the same very specific details. And after 18 books, I was like, you've used that like 17 times. And it's a fantastic series, but it's one of those things where like that can be really hard.
Yeah, no, I think I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, because it's I so many writers, even if they're good writers, and even if the story is going to be great, like when they're trying to do that, it's almost like you're reading along and then you get this giant paragraph of info dumping, and then then you're reading along again and you're like, I didn't need that. Or even if you're reading it as a standalone, it's obvious that they're just info dumping and here, let's get you up. All right. Regular readers, just sit tight for a minute. I'm going to explain everything to somebody who hasn't read it yet.
Or it could even be simple if like you always describe the character like there's one character I'm thinking of like she looks in the mirror and she puts powder on like a mole on her face. And when that's like how she's introduced every book, you're like, there's nothing wrong with that, but just mixing it up a little bit would be really good.
Well, and it starts to feel like the character is a little bit one-dimensional too, if you're not like introducing some other pieces of the character.
Right, and that's probably the least interesting thing about her.
How are endings for you? Because I know for me, endings are always the worst. I'm usually okay with beginnings. It's endings that I'm terrible at.
It's funny. Like a lot of times, I have the very final ending, like not just like the climax where where they find the murderer, but then like the kind of the final scene or two. Like I actually love those. Because I love thinking about like, well, so what has happened in their life and how has this changed? And what's like the fun scene to like end on?
That's very cool.
Gives a sense of the future.
Yeah. So how many books are at least scheduled out so far?
So for the Ground Rule series, there will be at least 5. I turned book 4 in, and it was due April 1st. I turned it in late March, and that's been accepted. I've actually seen the cover hasn't been released yet, and that will come out in April 2024. And there will be a 5th book that will come out, I assume April 2025. And you should totally follow me on social media because I will be announcing another project that has not been announced, but will also be coming out starting in 2024.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. That's exciting. So I'm trying to think of what else we haven't covered. Would you be willing to, I'm totally hitting you up with this. So if it takes you a couple minutes, would you be willing to read like a little paragraph from the new book? Or are you allowed to do that yet?
Oh, I can. But I'm also really not good at reading out loud. And
even if it's just
I'm not wearing my reading. I'm not wearing my reading glasses, so I have to do it without them.
Okay,
I'll read you the very first paragraph.
I was gonna say, let's just read the first lines. That's totally fine.
It is a truth acknowledged by coffee aficionados that nothing is ever as good as your first cup in the morning. But as I tested the new batch of our newest blend, a light roast we jokingly dubbed Concrete Blonde, and the name stuck, I decided sometimes your second cup could be life-changing. Just in case, I poured myself a 3rd cup. Still perfect.
Oh, that's good. I like that a lot. I love how you've changed up the location every time, even though the coffee cart itself is static, like you've been able to change that up. That's very fun.
And it's fun in book 4. They're starting their brick and mortar. So it's kind of fun in book 4. There's like the coffee cart and the food cart pod is still going, but they've actually fulfilled their brick and mortar dreams. So but then it was fun because then it was like a new organic filming situation to have a murder happen in.
Yes. Construction murder. So talk to me about your background research. Like just loving coffee and drinking coffee and going around to coffee carts in Portland is like super awesome, but you must have also done some research as far as the roasting and some of that kind of stuff. Did you get to go behind the scenes, and what kind of things did you do?
Well, like when I was in my university days, I did work a little bit as a barista, so I draw a little bit from that. And I have played around with roasting my own coffee beans at home, and I in a couple different ways. Anything from like popcorn popper to this small like little stovetop device that's actually really big in like South Korea, where you can like roast your coffee beans. And then I've talked with, and that's all done, I said, on the stovetop. And I have a bunch of different ways to make coffee. And yeah, and I've talked with roasters, I talked with baristas. I used to love it. They don't have it in their shop anymore, but for a while, like Heart Coffee on East Burnside had like the roasting machine was like in the main part of the coffee shop.
Yeah.
And it was really, it's incredibly hot. Like, I mean, so if you sat near it, some days you'd be like, wow, that's a very like heat intensive sort of thing. But then it was fun because they're like roasting and you could ask questions. And I've been other places where they like, there's a place out on the coast and they roast in like the coffee shop. And if they're roasting, they are more than happy to talk about what they're doing, and in general baristas, everyone is, they're always happy to talk about what they're doing as long as your timing is right. So if you walk into a coffee shop and it's slow and they say you like order a pour over, and they're more than happy to answer questions about like what they're doing, if like making that pour over, which takes like, 5 minutes. So there's time to talk.
Yeah.
But, a key thing there is the fact that like they're not otherwise busy. If they're like slammed, you're not going to want to go ask and play 20 questions. But when it's quiet, people loved it, are more than happy to tell you like what they're doing and how everything goes. And then I've also done a lot of reading. A couple, like there's Uncommon Grounds. It's a book about, the history of coffee. There's like the Little Book of Coffee Law. There's just a lot of different things. And, in books about roasting coffee and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I have like, I'll sometimes double check like a guide of like different types of coffee beans, like when I'm writing, of just making sure that what I'm saying is like factually accurate.
So have you yourself like tried different coffee beans from around the world or whatever to as you're figuring out what's going to happen in the book and where the beans are going to come from and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like I've tasted a lot of, like going out and trying, different like types of beans. It's great. And then I'm lucky that I live in Portland. There's a lot of options, to go and try different roasts and, and get the coffee shop, Brista, like, oh, this is like the espresso of the day. And it might be, you have your choice of a couple different types of beans, right? Or like the different like beans that are in a pour over. And I can think of like multiple shops where, you choose like the beans you want for your pour over. And that's a great way to like learn and explore.
Yeah.
And I also will read up on different companies' websites, and they'll have really interesting things about the farms. It's kind of like the fourth wave coffee thing. And a lot of people now talk about like the farms that they're working with. And that's really awesome.
Yeah. I had the background, I have a high school friend who ended up in design and is focused on like marketing and packaging for coffee companies right now. And so they had done work for this company that had brought up a small batch of beans up from I can't remember if it's El Salvador or Nicaragua, but one of the Central American countries. And they were selling like just a limited run of these. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to get that. But, I haven't been a coffee drinker for very long, so I have lots to catch up on. But so is that true for most of the stuff that you like when you were starting the series and you were going to it was going to be set on a food truck? Did you also then go talk to the different food truck owners and just kind of figure out like, how it works and what kind of problems they might have and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've talked with them. And my original inspiration, there used to be a food cart pod. It was about 3/4 of a mile from my house. And then I had a black lab, and we would walk down because there was a coffee cart. And my lab loved that cart because they also had dog treats.
Oh yeah.
And when I took a copy of Fresh from Bird when it came out to the owner of the cart, because he moved it downtown, but his cart's still in operation, and he still jokes about how he would know that I was coming because he would hear my dog barking like a block away. So he would get so excited, he would run up and he'd put his paws on the counter, and be like, ready for my biscuit.
That's
awesome. And as I talked with that cart, and that summer especially, because it was like a new food cart pod of, people are very passionate about what they did. It was really interesting talking to the different owners and realizing like how much it was a small community within a bigger city.
Yeah.
And it's even interesting following like politically in Portland, what happens with food carts. Like there's some new things about food carts needing to be able to like basically be plumbed. So instead of using like gray water disposal, to actually have like hookups, like in the food cart pods,
Yeah.
which can be kind of expensive to add. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah. I was
great,
gonna
actually.
say that's a major expense.
Mhm.
So
And arguably that would be the expense for the people that own a lot, not necessarily the cart. And so there's just interesting things that could happen
yeah,
with that.
yeah. Well, and it's been interesting as somebody who has enjoyed, sneaking into Portland on a regular basis, more pre-COVID than now, but to do the food cart pods, and we'd come in and the whole family would come and we'd just like go around to the different pods and get something from each one and then sit and just share and but honestly, a lot of them that we used to go to have gone away because we used, development or whatever. So it's been kind of fun and also just interesting from a, political, socioeconomic perspective to watch them sort of be really vibrant, and then, development comes in, so they have to go somewhere else. And
Well, when you think about it, a lot of those food cart pods were in lots that were otherwise not being used,
yeah,
right? They were basically, empty. And so the owner, rented out the space to food carts and turned it into like a really good destination. And then as the inner Portland got, more development got more expensive.
yeah,
And then suddenly like some of those lots were really more expensive, more, turned into like apartment buildings or other things like that,
yeah,
because
yeah,
that's where like you can make the most money off of. Like there's reasons for it. And then some of the pods got kind of pushed out into like, farther out, or in a few that have like held on to, or one of my favorite things, there's a couple, like there's like a Hinterland the bar, and like the Barley Pod, which is I forgot the name of the brewery, where they're like, oh, they started like the brewery, they started their tap room, the Barley Pod, and then they rented space to food carts. They know they didn't want to do food. So they incorporated having food carts on site so that
oh,
people
that's
could
a good
come for like
idea.
beer
Yeah,
and dinner.
yeah.
And the
And I know
Hinterland's a
that
bar.
particularly a lot of the ones that we were going to were on Division, and it was the one place on Division and then it was another place on Division. And I've noticed that in some cases they've dispersed on into tinier chunks. There'll be like 3 or 4 of them together instead of 10 or 15 together, so that they can fit into smaller, shimmy into smaller spaces where there probably won't be development because it's just not quite big enough or whatever. And so,
Right. But then you'll
but
see also like out in Beaverton, there's a big one called the BG Cartel. And it's awesome. And there's this really big, like kind of indoor outdoor bar space that calls itself like the Speakeasy. And there's probably at least 20 carts. And it's really designed with like, like an area for kids to play and lots of picnic tables. And so I think also it's kind of fun, or different communities are seeing like, oh, there's actually value to having these like
yeah, yeah,
really fun, that it's like very like, outdoorsy kind of space, which is great usually, but some covered spots for winter. And a lot of those carts are, they're very small businesses. They're not exclusive. There's a lot that are like immigrant owned, which is really fun. Or you can, like I don't think I would have had Guam barbecue if I hadn't
yeah,
gone to that Guam
yeah,
cart owned by, family from Guam.
yeah.
Like that's really
That's
amazing.
honestly one of the things that I really enjoyed about them, is just an opportunity to get to taste all different places from the people that are actually, their ethnic background is those places. And so you can talk to them about the food and whatnot. Yeah, actually it's been interesting. Vancouver, because of course Vancouver doesn't want to be like Portland. So we're pretty much behind the times when it comes to food carts, but we're starting to see some of them come finally. And there's an area between Vancouver and Camas, which are pretty much butted up against each other now as far as city limits because of development. But there's going to be like just an area where they're exclusively building it specifically to have a food cart pod. And so all of us are like, oh yeah, we don't have to drive to Portland. So hopefully some good ones will come in. So are you having to look into like construction and all of that now that your characters are going to be building a brick and mortar?
Well, in book 3, you find out that it's under construction, and then book 4, they're opening. And so
Okay,
I
so you
didn't
get
have
to skip that part.
yeah, I mean, I did
That's
think
probably a
about
good
it.
idea.
Like I said, I thought about it, but I'm like, there wasn't anything that I felt passionate about. So like book 4, like I said, which doesn't come out for a year, there'll be a little bit of, it'll basically be like when they're getting ready to open, and then the drama that happens at
Yeah.
their opening
Yeah.
party.
You didn't think that, 10 pages of them waiting for a permit was maybe a good story.
You could probably do something really
You
fun
kill
with
the
that.
inspector because you don't like the results or whatever.
Yeah.
So I was curious, like, when you do you have favorite cozies that you read? Probably not so much for inspiration now. I don't know how it works for you, but I know I can't necessarily read anything in the genre I'm writing right around the time I'm writing it because it would just mess with me. But do you have favorites in that genre, or even anything else that you're reading that you really like?
On the cozy side, Donna Andrews has a very long running series that's fun. That starts out, the names all have bird puns. So it starts out with Murder with Peacocks. There's a lot of Christmas pun titles. I think one of my favorites is The Penguin Who Knew Too Much. And like I said, that's at least into the upper teens if she hasn't broken into the 20s. Maybe it might even be close to 30 by now. And those are really fun. And she's done a very good job of keeping the series feeling fresh, even though there are so many like books in it, which I think is a real skill. On the kind of the millennial cozy side, I would say like Kate Lansing. She writes a series set in Boulder around wine. So like Killer Chardonnay, that's the first. I think the most recent is still Death Do Us Port. And also Mia Manasala's series that starts with Arsenic and Adobo also has the sort of like the kind of the younger cozy vibe, which if you like my books would also definitely be worth checking out. It's funny, I do mix up what I'm reading when I'm writing heavily. I mix up what I read, and like I just read all of the Kate Daniel series by Alona Andrews, and that was kind of came out right when like urban fantasy was at its peak, and it's amazing. It's a 10-book series that actually comes to a fantastic end. They have like kind of like an idea of a big bad that kind of exists throughout the series, and that actually comes to a very logical, satisfying conclusion. I'm purposely being a little bit vague, but I was really impressed with how they managed to craft the 10 books, that it holds up incredibly well. And it's kind of fun. It's a
Who's the
husband and
author
wife
of that
team.
one again?
Alona Andrews, and it's a husband and wife duo that co-write together.
That sounds fun. Yeah, no, I always am really impressed. Well, I mean, honestly, any series, I think, is a hard thing to pull off in some ways, just because you've got to keep that continuity, and your voice has to sound like it belongs in that series. You can't suddenly have your character have red hair if they used to have brown hair. I mean, that's an obvious one, but just keeping track of who did what when, so that what has happened. And the ability to tie it up in a satisfying way, I think, is also it always feels like there's a lot of stakes. The more books you have and the more complex story that you've created, it feels like there's pretty high stakes to give your readers a satisfying ending. So I'm always impressed when authors can pull that off.
Yeah, especially with 10 books. That was
yeah.
And it's a fun series, and I think honestly the authors would say this. I don't mean this mean that I think it gets better as it goes. They were definitely figuring things out in book 1, and it was good, but then they really hit their stride and it got really good. So.
Yeah. No, and I think that's probably pretty true for most series. I mean, honestly, it's also true for television series. The first few episodes, even if you really like the characters and the story, everybody's kind of getting to know each other and figuring out how to work together and stuff. And so I think that it's often true that it gets better as it goes along. So you have any opening night or release a week events that people should know about?
Well, actually, next week is pretty quiet. I will be coming by some bookstores, including Vintage Books, to sign and drop off some swag, and I can give a little preview. So the swag that I'm dropping off includes these really fun little retro keychains that say ground rules: stay cozy, drink coffee, solve mysteries.
That's awesome.
And then I have some stickers. These are from the front covers of the book.
Fun.
And some of them will get some little bonus from like book 2 covers.
Yeah.
And there'll be some other fun stuff too.
Okay.
And then it's kind of fun. I'm going to Yakima, Washington on June 3rd for an author fest
Yay.
at Inkling Bookstore. And I'll be actually at
Oh,
this.
yay.
I love Inklings. It's a great store.
Everybody's like, why is she so excited about? Yeah, I grew up in Central Washington near Yakima, so I'm like, oh, cool. I know where
Yeah.
that is.
Oh, yeah, they're having a whole author fair with multiple people, so it'll be pretty
That's
cool.
fantastic.
And I'll be at the Cedar Hills Powell's on June 2nd. And then I'm doing a couple events at one at Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and also at Interbearing Books in Dallas. And
Nice.
those will be in early June, like the 8th and the 10th, I think.
Okay. So pre-orders on the Vintage Book website. It's just on the front page, and there's a button in the center on the front page if you want to pre-order the book and get the signed copies and the swag and all that good stuff. You can still do that before next week. And for y'all who don't like to go into downtown Powell's, go see Kelly at Cedar Hills. It's further away for those of us who are in Vancouver, but the parking is much easier. So it kind of makes up for having to drive a little bit further to Beaverton. It's not hard to get to, and it's easy to park. And so it's a great venue for going to see your authors that you want to see, because you don't have to try to navigate parking in downtown Portland, which I know a lot of us are like, okay, I can do it, but it's not as much fun. So yeah. And I suppose you could go to Dallas and see her, but probably Cedar Hills is a little bit easier.
Probably the easiest of all the locals.
Well, thank you so much. I am going to just talk about a couple events that are coming up at the store here really quick. We have our June book clubs, June 3rd at 2 p.m., which is a Saturday, for our sci-fi fantasy book club. This month we're reading The Way Spring Arrives, which is an anthology inspired by Chinese mythology. So we're excited about that one. For cozy mystery lovers, we have a cozy mystery book club, and they are reading Six Sweets Under by Sarah Fox, and they meet on June 13th at 2 p.m., which is a Tuesday. And then we are going to have the ability to get copies of the new BTS book that everybody was buzzing about last week, and we are going to plan a release day event. We haven't quite nailed everything down yet, but if anybody's interested in that, we've got that in the works. So we just want to let everybody know. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly. We really appreciate you being out here tonight. Go buy Emmeline Duncan's new book next week. Pre-order if you want all the fun swag. But we will also have signed copies in the store after Tuesday. So even if you don't get a chance to pre-order, we'll still have fun stuff for you. So thank you so much. Have a good night.